Millionaire took his nonverbal daughter on blind dates. Only one woman spoke her language without saying a word. It was just another Thursday night at Hayden's Bistro, a quiet upscale restaurant on the edge of town, dimly lit and filled with the murmur of low conversations. Waiters floated past polished tables like shadows, balancing wine bottles and desserts with practiced ease. In the corner booth near the back, a man named Ethan Kessler sat still, fingers tightening slightly on the edge of a neatly folded cloth napkin. Across from him sat a little girl with thick dark curls and a solemn gaze. Her name was Lily, just 6 years old, and she hadn't spoken a single word since her mother passed away nearly a year ago. Ethan was successful, one of the minds behind an educational tech empire that powered school systems across the country. He had built his life on logic, structure, and control. But this was the one equation he couldn't solve: his daughter's silence. Every week at his sister's, urging Ethan agreed to one blind date. The rules: he always brought Lily. He never mentioned why. He didn't prompt or test. He just watched. The women were varied, bright, polished, accomplished, but not one had made it past the surface. They smiled at Ethan, complimented his shirt, asked what he did, maybe glanced at Lily, maybe said she's cute while texting under the table. Not a single one had truly seen her. And each time Lily would sit silently, hands in her lap, eyes scanning the room as if waiting for someone, or something, that never came. Tonight was no different. Ethan had low expectations. He watched Lily trace invisible lines along the wood grain of the table. She wore her mother's old cardigan slightly too big, sleeves pushed up, headphones resting unused around her neck. Her hands moved occasionally in soft, repetitive patterns. Subtle signs Ethan recognized from months of occupational therapy. Familiar heartbreaking loops of overstimulation. Then the hostess reappeared. "Your guest has arrived, Ms. Harper." Ethan didn't stand. He never did. But this time, something felt different before the woman even reached the table. Because this story doesn't begin with charm or chemistry. It begins with a child's silence, and the one person who listened to it with her hands. And before this night ends, a napkin, a drawing, and a wordless smile will start something neither Ethan nor Lily ever expected the possibility of: being seen, not tested. And the quiet beginning of something real. She walked in like she didn't belong. Rachel Harper tugged her coat a little tighter around her shoulders as she stepped into the restaurant. It was an older coat, navy blue, threadbare at the cuffs and clearly thrifted. Her boots were scuffed but clean, and there was a faint smear of green marker on the edge of her sleeve, probably from the daycare where she worked her second job. Her hair was still damp from the evening rain, pulled into a loose knot that had started to come undone. She glanced around nervously, the soft glow of chandeliers making her feel even more out of place. Couples in tailored clothes whispered across white tablecloths. Rachel looked down at her own outfit, simple, plain, and sighed. A hostess led her toward the corner booth. Rachel tried not to overthink it. She was only here because her roommate had signed her up for a professional singles blind date app without telling her. She hadn't expected to match with anyone, and definitely not someone whose profile simply said, "Dinner, Thursday. Bring kindness." As they approached the table, Rachel's steps slowed. She saw a man in a gray dress shirt sitting stiffly across from a little girl, maybe 6 years old, small, delicate. The girl had large brown eyes and a solemn expression, her fingers lightly tapping her chest and chin in a slow looping pattern. Rachel froze for half a breath. That movement? She knew it. Her younger cousin, who was nonverbal and on the spectrum, used to do the exact same thing. A soft, closed-loop gesture, basic ASL. It wasn't fidgeting. It was language. She didn't need anyone to explain. The girl wasn't shy. She was silent, intentionally, protectively. As they reached the booth, Rachel didn't offer her hand to the man. She didn't comment on the wine list or make an awkward joke. She crouched, gently, naturally, to eye level with the child and signed slowly. "Hi, my name is Rachel. What's your name?" The girl blinked, her hands freezing mid-motion. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, softly, hesitantly, she lifted one hand and signed back, the smallest sign, but enormous. Across the table, Ethan's heart stopped. It was the first time Lily had signed anything unprompted to a stranger in nearly 10 months. Rachel smiled, not performative, not expectant, just soft and real. Then she stood and slid into the booth. "I hope that wasn't weird," she said quietly, finally turning to Ethan. "I saw her signing earlier. My cousin's nonverbal, so I learned some ASL growing up." Ethan stared at her for a beat too long. Then he said without the guarded tone he'd used with everyone else, "It's not weird." And for the first time in months, he meant it. Dinner arrived in slow, quiet waves. Rachel didn't ask Ethan what he did for a living. She didn't compliment the ambiance or feign excitement over the wine selection. She simply stayed present, anchored not by pretense, but by intention. She focused on Lily, not intrusively, not performatively, just gently. "Do you like soup?" Rachel signed to her. Lily gave the faintest shrug. Rachel smiled and added, "You can try mine if you want." Then she winked and went back to her menu. No pressure, no coaxing. The soup arrived, brothy and steaming. Rachel signed hot before saying it aloud, showing Lily the spoon without fuss. Lily watched her, then looked down at her small backpack and unzipped it. Out came a crayon, just one, purple. She grabbed her napkin, flattened it, and began to draw. Rachel didn't interrupt. She didn't lean over with curiosity or praise. She let Lily create, respecting the quiet as if it were sacred. Ethan watched all of it, not just as a father, but as a man who had nearly forgotten what it looked like when someone truly cared without needing anything in return. Lily's fingers moved slowly, carefully. The drawing began to take shape, a round little bird wings, 2 short feet like tiny dots. It was crooked, slightly smudged by a drop of soup, but beautiful. She turned it toward Rachel and pushed it gently across the table. Rachel glanced down, blinking. "Is that me?" she signed softly, pointing to the bird. Lily tapped the bird, then reached out and touched the scarf around Rachel's neck. Rachel understood. "It's flying," she signed with a nod. "Not gone." Lily gave a small, slow nod. It was the kind of connection that didn't need sound to echo. Rachel folded the napkin carefully and slid it into her coat pocket. But even as she did, Lily's eyes lingered on it, as if the drawing now lived in both places, hers and Rachel's. Ethan said nothing. He didn't have to. His chest felt tight, not with fear, but with something startlingly close to hope. For so long he'd been drowning in silence. And now, a crayon bird, a small sign, and a stranger who listened had cracked it open. By the time the check arrived, Rachel glanced at her phone and winced. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly, looking at Ethan. "I have an early shift tomorrow at the library. I should head out." She turned to Lily, who was gently twirling her crayon in her fingers. Rachel leaned closer and signed, "Thank you for drawing with me." Lily didn't respond with a sign, but she made a small motion, a tilt of the head, a twitch of her lip, something suspended in the space between expression and stillness. Ethan noticed it. Rachel didn't. She grabbed her coat and stood. As she turned her bag, brushed the edge of the table and the folded napkin, quietly tucked in her lap, slipped out, falling unnoticed onto the seat cushion. "Take care," Rachel said softly, giving Ethan a nod. Then she left, her steps soft, the sound of the restaurant swallowing her exit. Silence returned to the table, but it wasn't the same kind that had settled over so many past dinners. This one was warmer, unfinished. Lily sat still for a few seconds. Then slowly she reached toward the booth cushion and retrieved the napkin. She held it in both hands as if it were made of glass. And then, like it was a secret meant just for her, she slipped it carefully into the inside pocket of her cardigan. Ethan said nothing. He only watched her. Over the last year, he had attended therapy sessions, consulted specialists, tried every speech app and communication board available. He had spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to understand his daughter's silence. But here, at this table over soup and a napkin, a woman in secondhand clothes had done what none of those experts had managed. She had listened, with her hands, with her presence, with a heart that didn't flinch. And Lily had responded. Ethan looked across the table at the now empty seat. He had been to expensive dinners, extravagant events rooms filled with performance and polish. But this one, quiet, imperfect, unexpected, was the first that felt like someone had finally spoken to them both, without saying a word. He didn't rush Lily. He didn't stand to leave. For once they stayed, just stayed. The next morning, Ethan poured Lily's favorite cereal, frosted oat rings with just enough milk to soften them, but not too much. But when he placed the bowl in front of her, she didn't reach for the spoon. She didn't even look up. Instead, Lily pulled a pencil toward her and began sketching on the corner of a grocery store flyer. At first, Ethan thought it was just idle doodling, but then she turned the paper slightly toward him. A building, a heart, and a single letter R. Ethan blinked. "You want me to find her?" Lily nodded once slowly. "But you don't even know her full name," he said gently. Lily tilted her head thinking. Then carefully she picked up the pencil again and scrawled something across the bottom in uneven block letters. Harper. Misspelled, but close enough. Rachel Harper. Ethan's breath caught. "How did you—" Lily tapped her temple, then pointed to her ears. She'd heard it, somewhere during dinner, maybe when the hostess called her name, maybe when the waitress repeated it. Lily had picked it up and remembered. Ethan crouched beside her. "Why do you want to find her?" he asked softly. Lily didn't sign anything. Instead, she reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out the folded napkin. She opened it carefully, revealing the crooked little bird she'd drawn the night before. She held it out. Ethan took it like it might fall apart in his hands. A piece of napkin stained with a drop of soup, but handled like a treasure. There was something unspoken between them in that moment, something Ethan hadn't felt in over a year. Trust. Lily was giving him a mission, and for once she wasn't hiding behind silence. She was reaching. He stood slowly, the napkin pressed to his chest. "Okay," he said. "I'll try." And for the first time since his wife died, Ethan didn't feel helpless. He felt needed. He spent the rest of that day combing through every digital trace he could find. But Rachel Harper wasn't on social media. No Facebook, no Instagram, not even a LinkedIn profile. But by late afternoon, an old community college archive popped up with her name on a volunteer list, alongside a grainy photo. She was crouched beside a child, holding up a flashcard with a rainbow on it. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ethan stared at the photo, hope flickering where fatigue had lived for far too long. He didn't know how this would end, but he knew where to begin. Ethan parked across the street from the modest brick building, tucked between a laundromat and a discount pharmacy. There was no sign out front, just a hand-painted paper taped inside a window that read, "Children's Learning and Language Center. Volunteers welcome." He stayed in the car for a moment, watching the front entrance through the windshield, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. The napkin, now safely pressed inside a file folder, sat on the passenger seat beside him, like a silent compass. When he finally stepped inside, the warmth of the place hit him immediately. It didn't smell like antiseptic or polished wood. It smelled like crayons and old carpet and peanut butter snacks. Laughter echoed faintly from deeper inside. He waited in the doorway, unsure if he should announce himself. Then he saw her. Rachel was crouched on the floor of a small activity room, surrounded by 5 kids. One bouncing on a therapy ball, another stacking blocks, a third signing rapidly, and 2 others watching her every move. Her hands moved effortlessly, guiding one child, redirecting another. Her smile wasn't forced or posed. It was quiet, comfortable, worn in, and that same smudge of green marker was still on her sleeve. Ethan stood frozen. He wasn't a man prone to awe. He built companies, predicted markets, calculated risk with the precision of a surgeon. But this ordinary woman on a mat with children who needed someone present, not perfect, left him completely undone. He waited until another volunteer ushered the children out for snack time. Rachel stayed behind to tidy the scattered picture cards. She hadn't seen him yet. When she finally turned and spotted him in the doorway, she didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him, quiet and unreadable. He stepped forward, slow and respectful. She raised a hand, not in greeting, but as a gentle stop. He obeyed. "I didn't know your name until yesterday," he said quietly. Rachel's brow lifted slightly. Still, she said nothing. "My daughter remembered it. She asked me to find you." Still silence. He hesitated, then added, "She kept the napkin. She sleeps with it beside her pillow." Rachel's gaze dropped for just a moment. A flicker of something, a breath, a tremor, crossed her face. "I didn't mean to leave it," she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I put it in my bag." Ethan shook his head. "Doesn't matter. She thinks it's a gift." Rachel looked up slowly. "Why are you here?" "Because she's different. Since that night," he said, honestly. "She draws again. She reaches. She hums." That last word hit harder than he expected. His voice caught. Rachel's eyes shimmered, but she blinked it away. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "You didn't need to." Then, almost awkwardly, Ethan lifted his hands and signed, stiffly and perfectly, "Thank you for seeing her." Rachel gasped softly. Not because it was flawless, it wasn't, but because it was real, and it stunned her, silent. 3 days later, Rachel was walking home from a late shift at the public library, her tote bag slung over one shoulder, grocery list crumpled in her coat pocket. The night was damp, the kind of spring chill that slipped under sleeves and reminded you winter hadn't fully given up yet. She was digging in her bag for loose change when she looked up and froze. Towering above her on the side of a newly renovated tech campus was a glowing billboard. A man in a charcoal suit stared out over the street, arms crossed, expression sharp. Ethan Kessler, reimagining education for tomorrow. Her chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the name. It was the face. The same man who had sat across from her so silently. The one who hadn't said much but watched her sign. The one who brought a little girl to dinner like it was no big deal. He was the Ethan Kessler, the founder of EdReach Technologies, a man worth millions, maybe more, the man who had never told her any of this. The city around her moved as if she weren't there, traffic buzzing, horns in the distance, people walking by with headphones in. But Rachel felt like the whole world had paused. It wasn't the wealth that shocked her. It was the silence, the omission, the possibility that what she thought had been a genuine human moment might have been a test. Her fingers curled tightly around her grocery list. She hadn't bought anything, couldn't remember what was on it. She turned and walked home with empty hands and a spinning mind. That night, she didn't return to the children's center. The next day, she traded shifts. Then she turned off her phone. By the end of the week, she'd received 11 missed calls from a blocked number. She didn't answer any of them. Not because she was angry, but because she was wounded. Had her kindness been cataloged? Was Lily just a litmus test for good character? Was she a story he could tell at board meetings? Look what I found in a diner. A real person. Rachel stood at her kitchen window, staring at the folded napkin she'd placed on the sill. The bird Lily had drawn was still there. Wings slightly smudged ink faded, but still flying. And yet, the meaning had shifted. What once felt like a treasure now teetered on the edge of performance. Rachel didn't cry, but her chest ached in that particular way grief does, like something had almost begun and then stopped just short of becoming real. Across town, Lily had fallen silent again. No drawings, no humming, no signs. And when Ethan offered her a book or a walk or her favorite show, she simply pulled a blanket over her head. A week had passed, then 2, and Ethan realized the night she met Rachel had changed something in Lily, and losing her had changed it back. The silence had returned, but this time, it wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. Ethan stood in the kitchen staring at the untouched mug of coffee on the counter. It had gone cold an hour ago, but he couldn't bring himself to reheat it. Not when the rest of the house felt frozen in something deeper than temperature. In the living room, Lily sat curled under a fleece blanket, the same cardigan pulled around her shoulders, sleeves almost hiding her hands. She didn't hum. She didn't sketch. She didn't even reach for the crayon cup Ethan had left beside the couch. The house, once filled with therapy checklists and hopeful routines, now moved on autopilot. Ethan tried everything. Music, her favorite picture book, even asking about the library. Lily didn't shake her head. She just didn't answer. That night after she went to bed, he wandered into the living room, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped like a man twice his age. His eyes landed on something sticking out from beneath the couch. It was Lily's sketch pad, half tucked, forgotten. He pulled it out, flipping it open, and stopped cold. On the page was a drawing, a bird again. But this one was different. Its wings were gone. Below it were 2 open hands, not grabbing, not holding tight, just waiting, as if trying to catch it or maybe release it. Beside it, a heart. Simple, childlike, but deliberate. Ethan sank onto the couch, the sketch pad trembling slightly in his hands. His throat tightened. He hadn't cried since the funeral, but something about that wingless bird, drawn by a girl who hadn't drawn in weeks, fractured something inside him. She missed Rachel, not because Rachel had fixed her, but because Rachel had seen her, and Ethan had let that connection slip through his fingers. He closed the sketch pad, hands shaking. The quiet of the house pressed in around him. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The next morning, he didn't go to the office, didn't call his assistant. He just drove. No destination, no plan, just letting the streets carry him forward. But his mind stayed behind, in the silence, in the sketchbook, with a bird that couldn't fly and a daughter who had gone still again. Somewhere between traffic lights and side streets, Ethan heard Lily's voice in the only way she knew how to give it, through a crayon, through a page, through stillness. And it whispered, "I'm not gone. I'm just waiting." That was when he remembered the drawing of the door. He hadn't looked closely before, but in the margins above the crooked frame was a tiny shape. A bell, shaped like a cat, and Ethan knew exactly where it was. The old language center sat nestled between a pediatric clinic and an optometrist's office, half forgotten, in the quiet corner of the city's historic district. Years ago, Ethan had helped fund its early intervention program through his foundation, but he hadn't stepped inside since Lily was 3. He remembered the building vaguely, but the cat-shaped bell above the entrance door that had slipped his memory. Apparently not Lily's. He parked at the curb, heart pounding. He didn't bring an assistant. He didn't tell the foundation. He didn't even bring Lily. He just came. The bell chimed as he opened the door, a soft jingle that immediately pulled him back to those early, desperate days, when grief still gripped every corner of their home, and Lily's silence was fresh, raw, and terrifying. The interior hadn't changed. Scuffed linoleum floors, hand-painted alphabet posters, a faded paper sunflower taped crookedly to the check-in desk. The place smelled like finger paint and old books. He moved quietly through the hallway until he heard a familiar voice. Not speaking, singing, off-key, gentle, comforting. He peeked around the corner and saw her. Rachel. She was kneeling beside a young boy helping him zip his backpack. Her sleeves were rolled up hair pulled back in a loose braid, and that same faint smear of green marker clung to her wrist like a signature. She hadn't seen him yet, and in that moment, he didn't see a woman who had once startled him with kindness. He saw the one person who had stepped into his daughter's world without hesitation, and never once asked who he was. He waited until the boy ran off down the hallway. Rachel stood slowly turning to gather some papers from the floor. Then she saw him. She didn't freeze this time, but she didn't smile either. Her eyes tired but steady asked the question her lips never did. Ethan stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "I didn't come to fix anything," he said softly. "I came because she wouldn't let me stay quiet." Rachel blinked a flicker of surprise behind her guarded gaze. "She keeps drawing you," he continued. "Little things, your coat, your scarf, your hands. She even drew that door." He reached into his coat pocket and gently unfolded the drawing, Lily's sketch of the crooked door with the cat-shaped bell. "She asked me to find this place," he said, placing the paper in Rachel's hand. She stared at the lines, her fingers tracing the bell without speaking. "I think she remembers all of it," Ethan added. "Not just what you said, but how you were." Rachel still didn't speak. The silence hung between them, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was waiting. "I don't want to talk about my company," Ethan said finally, "or what I do, or how much I've screwed this up." Rachel looked up slowly, meeting his gaze. "Then what do you want?" He paused. "To know if you'll let me start again. Not from the beginning, just from here." Rachel stood still, the drawing of the door still in her hand, her thumb slowly brushing over the corner of the paper. She hadn't spoken in over a minute, and Ethan didn't push. He knew better now. She finally folded the sketch in half and tucked it gently into her pocket, like something fragile, maybe even sacred. "You lied," she said, her voice even not angry. "Just plain." "I did," Ethan admitted, "by omission. I didn't say who I was because I didn't want it to matter." Rachel exhaled through her nose, quiet and steady. "It mattered anyway." "I know." There was a long pause. "You let me believe I was just someone you happened to meet," she added. Ethan's eyes softened. "You weren't someone I happened to meet. You were the only person who ever walked in and spoke to her." Rachel looked away for a beat, like the words were too heavy to catch eye to eye. Then she looked back. "And now you're just showing up here." "I didn't plan that far ahead." He admitted, a small smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "You're Ethan Kessler," she said. "Don't you always have a plan?" He gave a quiet chuckle, not the polished one from interviews, but something real, human. "I had a plan," he said. She drew a better one. That almost made her smile. Almost. She stepped a little closer, not into his arms, not into something too soon, but just enough to stand beside him, their shoulders almost brushing. "If you want to see her again," she said, voice low, "don't bring gifts. Don't bring cameras. Don't bring promises." He nodded. "I won't bring crayons." That made her crack, a tiny laugh barely audible. "Bring yourself," she added, "not the guy on the billboard." Ethan's voice turned softer than she'd ever heard it. "I was never more myself than when I watched you talk to her." They stood there for a moment in a hallway filled with peeling paint and echoes of children's laughter. No spotlight, no grand gestures, just two people, worn, cautious, real, learning how to meet in the middle. Rachel reached into her canvas satchel and pulled out a sketchbook. She flipped to the back and gently pulled out a folded napkin. "The bird's wings got a little smudged," she said, handing it over, "but it's still flying." Ethan took it with trembling hands. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, because this wasn't a reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a door, and this time he knew he had to knock before entering. 3 days later, a single text appeared on Ethan's phone. "If she wants to come, we'll be here Friday, 4 p.m., quiet time group. No punctuation, no emojis, no expectations. Just a chance." Ethan stared at the message for a long time. Friday came, and he didn't go. He told himself it was because of meetings, because of work piling up. But the truth was simpler. He was scared, not of rejection, but of not being ready, of bringing Lily too soon, of doing it wrong again. But Lily, she didn't forget. That night she left a folded page on the kitchen table. It showed 3 crayons, yellow, red, blue, underneath a stick figure girl with a scarf, a man with glasses, and in the middle, herself, smiling arms wide. Ethan's heart clenched. He tucked the page into his wallet and said nothing. The next Friday came, and this time, they went. The car ride was silent, but not tense. Lily stared out the window, the sketchbook clutched to her chest. Her coat zipped up her scarf, looped twice like Rachel had shown her. Ethan gripped the steering wheel with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. When they pulled up to the center, he glanced back. "You okay?" Lily gave a single nod. They walked through the doors just before 4:00. The same faint jingle of the cat-shaped bell rang above them. Ethan let Lily lead, staying a few steps behind. The quiet therapy room had tall windows spilling soft afternoon light onto the floor. A semicircle of low chairs sat near a table filled with fidget toys, picture books, and broken crayons worn to their wrappers. Rachel was sitting on the carpet with 2 kids. One was quietly tapping blocks together. The other was chewing on the end of a marker. She looked up when she heard the creak of the door and smiled. Not the kind of smile reserved for guests or donors, but the kind people offer when they recognize home. Lily didn't smile back, but she walked forward, slowly, purposefully. She didn't run to Rachel. She didn't sign. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. The same one, still carried, still sacred. She placed it gently on the edge of the table. Rachel froze. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, careful not to startle anyone. Lily reached into her backpack again. 3 crayons. She handed the yellow to Rachel, the blue to Ethan, who had just stepped inside the room, and kept the red for herself. Then she sat, no words, no prompting, just presence. Ethan followed her lead. No introductions, no apologies. He sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. Rachel joined them. 3 people, 1 table, 3 crayons. The room faded, and Lily began to draw. The crayon moved slowly in Lily's small hand, dragging lines across the page with quiet certainty. She didn't glance up, didn't ask for help. She just drew. A house, uneven roof, 1 window higher than the other. A tree that leaned too far to the left. Then 3 small figures, 1 tall with messy hair and a blocky blue shape around the shoulders. Ethan, 1 medium height with a long braid and a scribbled scarf. Rachel. And the third herself, in the middle, smiling. When she finished, she set the crayon down, looked at her drawing, then reached across the page and signed a single word. Stay. Rachel's breath hitched. Her fingers trembled just slightly against the yellow crayon. Ethan didn't move. His throat tightened, glassy eyes fixed on his daughter's face. Lily didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The silence in the room wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, of acceptance, of choice. Rachel raised her hands slowly, cautiously. I didn't know if she'd want to see me again. Lily responded without hesitation. I waited. Then she reached into her backpack one last time and pulled out a small folded piece of cardstock. She handed it to Rachel. Rachel opened it with careful fingers. On the front was a crayon sketch, 3 stick figures again hand in hand. The tallest had spiky hair, the medium one had a braid, the smallest wore a red cape. Beneath them in uneven block letters were the words, "I don't need saving, just company." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. She didn't cry, but she came close. Ethan turned away briefly, blinking fast. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared for it. There was no business plan for this kind of moment. Lily reached over and touched his sleeve. When he looked back at her, she signed 2 more words, slow and deliberate. "Crayons, tomorrow." Ethan nodded. Rachel nodded too, and none of them needed to say anything else. Because in that moment, in that room with mismatched chairs and paper snowflakes and crayon wrappers, something had begun again. Not love, not promises, not perfection, but space. And for 3 people learning how to speak in presence, not word space, was more than enough. Spring arrived like a secret, quietly, gently. Not in a rush of color, but in the way people started cracking their windows open again. And how the trees hesitated, then bloomed anyway. At the language center, it showed up in chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Tulips, smiling suns, crayon-colored rainbows drawn by small hands. Inside in the small back room, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, one sock missing a red crayon tucked behind her ear like a pencil. Her hair was messier these days. Rachel's braid never lasted more than an hour before Lily started spinning again. But that was okay, because now she spun with purpose. She was drawing again. Across the room, Rachel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She watched Lily in silence, the kind of silence that no longer hurt. It was steady now. Familiar. Ethan was late, not fashionably, just life late. He'd walked Lily to school that morning and ended up talking to a parent about a scholarship program. Rachel didn't mind. He always came, not for show, not with a camera, but with soup when she was sick, with a picture of Lily holding a sign that said, "Your work isn't small, I see it." The day she lost a freelance gig. He didn't flood her life. He just filled the spaces she had stopped trying to decorate. And now she let him. The door creaked softly as Ethan stepped in, wind in his hair, 2 cinnamon teas in hand. Lily lit up, not with sound but with motion. She ran up and tugged his coat pocket gently. He handed her a folded page. She opened it on the floor, inside another drawing, but this one was hers. 3 figures again, a house behind them. In a speech bubble above her own smiling face, Lily had written, "We don't match, but we fit." Rachel knelt beside her heart, thudding throat tight. Lily reached into her backpack once more and pulled out something else, an envelope. She handed it to Rachel. Inside a swatch of deep blue fabric, smooth, familiar. Rachel's breath caught. "This is..." Ethan nodded slowly. "My mother's last quilting project. I kept one piece, for when I knew who it was meant for." Rachel looked at him stunned. "You think I'm gonna turn this into something dramatic?" "I think," he said gently, "you already are." She smiled, small, uncertain, but real. Then Lily did something she hadn't done in a long, long time. She reached out and took both of their hands. Her fingers moved, signing, "Stay." Not just for crayons, not just for tea, stay for this. And they did. They didn't plan it. Not the timing, not the meeting, not the healing. It just happened in the quiet spaces that most people overlook. In a napkin that fell from a lap. In a child's drawing. In a woman who didn't flinch when there were no words to fill the silence. Weeks passed, then months. The awkwardness faded into routine. Lily still didn't speak aloud, but she spoke volumes in crayon, in sign, in where she sat and who she leaned into. Rachel never tried to define what was forming between them. She didn't ask for titles or promises. She only asked for honesty. Ethan, once a man who measured time in deals and deadlines, began to slow down. He learned how to sit on a floor for an hour without checking his phone, how to say "I see you" without needing to use his voice. And Lily, the girl who had once curled beneath a blanket to avoid the world, began to emerge again, a little more every day. One afternoon in the park, Lily ran ahead, arms stretched like wings spinning in wide circles beneath the soft green of spring leaves. Rachel and Ethan sat on a nearby bench watching her with quiet pride. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't rush into the future. They just existed together in that small, perfect moment. Later, Lily returned to the bench and placed a folded note in Rachel's lap. Inside, written in wobbly but determined letters, it read, "You were the first one who talked to me like I was already here." Underneath it, another line, "Now you always will be." Rachel looked up, her eyes glassy. Ethan didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He just reached for her hand, and this time she didn't let go.